Simulation Theory, Mindscreen, Implantation, and Avoiding the Contradiction of Physical Reality by Jeff Grupp, copyright 2013 and 2019. Simulated reality. All of our lives are lived within our consciousness, our experience. We never see reality outside of our conscious experience. This leads to a valid question that philosophers have been extremely concerned with for hundreds of years. How do we know that our experience represents anything outside of our consciousness, since we have no evidence that it does? And how do we know that all our conscious contents, or the vast majority of them, are not only inside consciousness, with no connection to an externality? In this article, I will show the stark and hitherto undiscussed evidence that nearly all our conscious experience, such as our experience of the world, does not represent anything real outside of our minds. I will not argue that the aspects of reality that are only in our consciousness are merely a dream, but I will show that there is specific evidence that the physical reality we experience in our minds is more akin to a computer program or a computer simulation, and furthermore that it can be shown that minds interact with each other inside this computer simulation. The basics of this idea were popularized in the 1999 film The Matrix. The computer simulation thesis I will argue for here has, however, little in common with the simulation theory of The Matrix, and would be a far more advanced simulation theory than seen in The Matrix. But the overall plan of this paper is not so much to discuss how computer simulated mental reality works, but rather to firmly verify that our minds, or mind screens as I will call them, are computer simulations. I presented the initial aspects of this research at a talk at the Winter Colloquium Lecture at the University of Michigan, Dearborn in April 2013, where I was teaching at the time. But in that talk I only discussed the very initial aspects of this research, and the point of this paper is to present more of this work. When a person sees a tree, the person nearly never wonders if their experience of the tree in their mind is real or not, or if it actually represents reality or not, if the tree is just a picture in their mind and there is no tree out in reality, or if the picture in their mind of the tree is really about a tree outside of their consciousness and which looks just like the tree picture in their mind. Simulation theory is the thesis that the human experience of their reality and of physical reality is an implanted and programmed cinematic-like picture screen, mind screen, that is only in the mind, and that our experiences we have with other people are shared simulation experiences and not shared physical world experiences. Simulation theory has become a somewhat hot issue in science and mass media nowadays. It is regularly discussed in mainstream news. A few famous physicists have written compelling books about it, and it is showcased in popular films, such as The Matrix, Videodrome, Existenz, and so forth. And some philosophers, Chalmers, Bostrom, etc., are devoting greater attention to the topic than previously. However, the straightforward evidence for simulation theory has, to my knowledge, not yet been discovered, and a major point of my research is to ascertain this evidence, as will be presented below. Most of simulated reality research and simulation theory research follows from Nick Bostrom's interesting article that seemed to get the activity going regarding this theory years ago. Bostrom's thesis is roughly based on the idea that if our universe, our reality, can contain intelligent life, as we know it does from ourselves, given that the universe is believed to be so incredibly old, then it is very likely that there has been enough time for beings to have developed much further than we humans have, wherein we are to have reason to believe they would create simulations of realities of which we humans are, more likely than not, one such simulated reality. Below, I will have no commentary on that interesting and worthwhile project. The point of this article is entirely different and is merely to verify that we are now creatures that are simulants of a creator simulator. The evidence for this is more straightforward and easy to come by than I believe most professional philosophers may have believed, and the information that follows is not risky and I do not believe will be very controversial. Rather, the evidence for simulation theory is quite plausible and only uses the most basic, safe, practical, and believable concepts of philosophy, such as the idea that you have a mind that has picture images and that the images are of three-dimensional colorful solids, for example, and the very simplest of empirical measurements, such as the most basic and measurable shape of the brain matter inside a person's head. Such bland and reliable information is the consistent level of where information will reside in this study. Simulation theory has a few varieties such as the brain in the vat thought experiment, digital reality theory, Platonic dualism, mereological nihilism, Buddhist atomism, among others. Though my research in this article stems from these, my research of simulation theory expands into new descriptions and understandings of simulation theory via the novel evidence for and the novel descriptions of our simulated reality. It is best not to too closely compare our present-day iPhones and computers to what our mind screens are. Our iPhones and computers are, it is probably safe to say, incredibly primitive. Our mind screens, our consciousnesses that we live through moment to moment, and which are all we've ever known, are an astonishingly advanced technology, to the point that professional academics cannot define what these consciousnesses, these mind screens are in any clear way, as is regularly discussed in professional philosophy. Our mind screens have free will, which is a feature so perplexing that some philosophers call it a contradiction that emerges ex nihilo. And it is probably quite safe to state that no philosopher has been able to come close to defining free will. And our mind screens additionally contain emotion, qualia or something similar to it, self-correction capacities, desire, fear, subjectivity, the capacity to feel inner, subjective versus outer, that is objective, empirical awareness, God experience, and self-awareness, all items that professional academics are just struggling at best to define in the present day rather than create these in a computer mind. And now for the terms section. Desimulation. Varying levels of ecstasy when a simulant mind screen ceases to function as a mere simulating machine, where the mind screen instead directly perceives that mind screen as merely a cinematic screen and perceives to varying levels the creator simulator. Creator simulator or creator programmer. A spirit, mind, being, for lack of better words, of pure joy, ecstasy, love, and goodness, and perfect existence, who created mind screen simulants for various reasons. The creator simulator has given means and ways for mind screen simulants to desimulate and become aware of the infinite mind and being of the creator simulator. Mental entity, ME. Any mental content of mind. Any chunk, be it thought, feeling, and so forth, existing in the stream of mind screen experience. And mental reality, whether atomic or non-atomic chunks of experience. Mind is just mind screen. Mind dislocation. This is when a mind screen believes it exists and lives in a physical reality, in a physical body, when in fact that mind screen does not. And those experiences are merely non-representational content not connected to any exteriority. In other words, this is when a mind screen believes the picture cinema of its mind screen reality is about a reality outside of itself, rather than merely a picture cinema mainly in the mind alone, more akin to a dream. The mind screen does not give evidence for the existence of mind screen being about contents outside of itself, and the more logical thesis is that Mindscreen contents are a mere cinema not representing a reality beyond itself. Mind prime. This is your mind, which is a sentient mind consistent of thoughts, feelings, visualizations, and qualia. For those philosophers who do not believe in qualia, they can merely drop this out of the definition of mind prime to suit their preferences. Mindscreen. This is a person, a mind, a soul, a simulant, experiencing picture screen feeling consciousness that does not represent any externality. Reality appears like a cinematic screen observed from moment to moment, and each subjectivity or mind that is in a state of simulation, having mind-dependent, mind-locked experience of worlds and realities, exists as varying planes and types of simulation vivency, which it defines as self or I. The simulation process involves cinematic like mental experiencing, simulation, of patterned shapes and color patches in what is simulated to and or in the mind screen as one physical world or as two intersubjective reality of feelings, thoughts, etc. The boundaries between one empirical and two subjective are often unclear and smeared, but regardless, according to simulation theory, both are part of the computer simulation. They, in the vast majority of cases, do not represent items outside of the mind screen, such as other mind screens or the creator simulator. The mind screen is not actually a part of a person, the real nature of self. And it is, in a sense, not fully real. That is, it has less reality than the experience of the creator simulator, both of which are realized during stages of desimulation ecstasy, wherein the knowledge of the creator simulator dominates all experiencing. Non-realism, or not R. This is the opposite of realism. Realism, R. Representationalism, and the idea that there is a physical reality outside of the mind screen that is not only real outside of the representations, but where the inner representations accurately map the externality. In other words, realism is the trust and belief that what is experienced about the world and the mind is how the external world actually is. When a person sees a tree, the inner mental picture of the tree is merely a picture of a real mind-independent entity in a physical world. Realism is the opposite of mind dislocation. The reality you believe you exist in really is the one that you are in. Simulation. Mind screen content originating and being caused by not R, rather than R, implanted into MP, by an intelligence rather than from the environment, externality. In other words, an externality is not the cause of mind screen experience. Vivency. Vivency is defined by J.C. Guan as follows: the apparent reality associated with a certain state of consciousness. In our ordinary state of consciousness, this vivency includes the physical universe, but as each state of consciousness may have different properties, so the laws and properties of each external state of nature may vary. The error is to assume that the external physical universe, the natural environment of the OSC, represents ultimate reality, and that all other apparent external vivencies are illusions. In actuality, the external physical universe is the vivency of the OSC, and its laws are of the OSC. When we enter an ASC, or altered state of consciousness, we enter some vivency of the NOR, non-ordinary reality, of which the laws of our external universe are only special cases. Next section, the simulation theory argument. If mind screen experience is actually a computer simulation rather than a realist representation of a physical externality, then it will be demonstrable that the physical reality cannot be represented in a brain or nervous system, and for that reason, a human mind screen cannot experience physical reality as typically believed, which is as a physical body correctly consciously experiencing via internal picture screen consciousness recreations and maps of externality through a nervous system. Rather, mind screen experience would not be generated by apprehending and processing information from an exteriority, from the world, but rather via some other source, but made to appear about exteriority. In other words, humans view physical reality as a cinematic like screen, mind screen, but where the pixelated digital pictures and screen imagery of landscapes and realities in consciousness also involve olfactory, auditory, gustatory, and tactile elements in addition to visual picture screen consciousness. According to simulation theory, the brain is just another theme of the mind screen's simulated reality, not a real mind-independent item. The brain, like a tree or cloud, is just another part of the story of the cinematic, non-representationalist mind screen existence. Consider the following argument. Point 1. Human experiencing contains picture imagery and subjective experiencing. Ordinary consciousness involves picture consciousness, a picture screen, a mind screen, and experience. Point 2. If consciousness, mind screen, is a physical process, then it experiences and interacts with physical reality through matter, brain, nervous system. But matter, such as brains, lobes, tissues, neurons, chemicals, molecules, cerebrospinal fluid, etc., does not have advanced feeling-infused televisual picture screens of self-awareness of any sort inside of them. Point 3. Organic brain matter, which is meat, does not seem like the sort of medium that can have precise and vivid mind screen digitation in it. Feeling, incredibly organized and patterned picture thoughts, etc. And suggesting brain cells or groups of cells would be analogous to suggesting that a hunk of meat can have an ultra-advanced, self-aware cinematic mind screen in it that has emotion, feeling, self-awareness, color experiencing, problem solving, and possibly qualia and free will. In other words, to suggest that meat can have in it or could function as self-aware, feeling-infused digital picture screen televisions would be to suggest that inside of meat are seemingly supernatural, or at the very least ineffable, computers of such complexity that humans cannot even define them yet. In this article, the thesis will be taken that such is impossible, and meat does not have such self-aware televisions, let alone experienced televisual screens of any sort. Footnote attached to this premise. Jack Gallant's research at UC Berkeley, which might at this point be considered by some to contain an objection to this premise and thus to this argument overall, will be discussed in detail below and will be found not to contain any such objection. Point 4. Mind screen experience not only involves the cinematic feeling content of mind, but also experiencing, which is a self-aware entity, for lack of more precise wording, and which it is safe to say is to this point ineffable and a process that is beyond scientific measurement. It is seemingly safe to conclude that feeling-infused cinematic self-awareness is not derivable from chemicals. It appears safe to conclude that no matter how many chemicals one puts in a vat and which way one mixes them in any complicated way, the chemistry will not start feeling, will not spontaneously come to self-awareness and picture screen cinematics. I can imprint or cause an image in a chemical soup, such as by cymatics, sound vibrations, but the chemistry will not have experiencing. It seems safe to assume sense No such instance of self-aware feeling infused experiencing chemicals have ever been observed or created, including in the human brain. If we can assume chemicals are not the sort of entity that can serve as a medium for such experiencing, then a physical brain cannot consciously be an experiencing mind screen. Point 5, following points 3 and 4, picture consciousness is not located within and does not come from organic matter. So picture consciousness or any other ineffable intensities of mind cannot operate via brain or matter to interact with and or perceive and represent physical reality or any exteriority. Point 6, the human mind screen, cannot be located within the physical reality in the physical empirical cosmos as an organic being that it believes it is located within from the indications of the mind screen. Point 7, human mind screen experience of physical reality is not the reality that the mind screen exists amid. Point 8, human mind screen experience of physical reality does not represent mind-independent physical objects and a mind-independent externality. And the conclusion of this argument, the simulation theory argument, is non-representational mental experience of physical reality is a fabricated or artificial mental model simulation, since it is not caused by any externality. A human believes he has a mind for interacting with the world via organic matter, a brain or nervous system. But the argument just given shows that a mind apparently does not and cannot use organic matter or any known matter or medium to perceive and represent an externality. A human is not where he assumes he is in the physical reality, and her interaction with physical reality is some sort of internal cinema rather than light information taken in, obtained, perceived from an externality outside of the mind screen. A human mind screen beholds a colorful array of picture imagery in orderly sequence, and thus the cinematic mind screen is known to exist directly. But contents represented beyond the mind screen cannot be known directly. Brain meat is not the sort of medium needed to create an ineffable, self-aware, representational, feeling consciousness, and our bodies cannot produce world experience. And brain meat, therefore, is merely part of the simulation reality. In more precise words, if in the represented world, which is the simulation according to this article, there is no actual screen known to exist, no self-aware digital cinema screen measured to be experiencing or experienced, as premises 3 and 4 of the simulation theory argument would appear to indicate, then representational picture screen consciousness of the world outside of itself cannot exist via the physical world that the mind screen involves. In addition to imagistic mental screens, human consciousness also involves olfactory, gustatory, auditory, and tactile experiences, just as mental picture screens are in brains via representation. Brains and matter also do not contain vibrating speakers or hearing devices, or taste buds to taste, or noses for smelling. Experiencing does not occur in noses, eyes, ears, tongues, and skin sensors. It occurs in mental space, where the precise nature or location of mentation has not been discovered. In other words, the self-aware experiencing of these mental realities has not been measured in brain meat. I can put in my inner experience right now the sound of a car horn that I heard earlier today, but there is no vibration or sound system in my brain. So the sound experience occurs by a means foreign to what sound is, which is matter vibration. Ubiquitously, it is assumed by academics that mind is somehow physical, despite the lack of evidence or even counter-evidence. This is where virtually all academic work on consciousness begins, and to suggest otherwise is nearly an embarrassment. Direct awareness of mind-screen consciousness reveals that it appears not physical. But that finding is not tolerated by contemporary academics despite the direct introspective evidence which, it seems, could be widely agreed upon. Consider what Searle writes in the appropriately titled Mystery of Consciousness in the 3rd paragraph of the book. Compared to mountains and molecules, consciousness seems mysterious, ethereal, even mystical. Consciousness does not seem to be physical in the way that other features of the brain, such as neuron firings, are physical. Nor does it seem to be reducible to physical processes by the usual sorts of scientific analyses that have worked for such physical properties such as heat and solidity. That's from Searle's famous book, Mystery of Consciousness, 1977, page Roman numeral 12. But then, in the next paragraph of the book, in believing the only way to handle the seeming non-physicality of consciousness is via dualism rather than simulation theory. Searle writes, but dualism, as traditionally conceived, seems a hopeless theory because, having made a strict distinction between the mental and the physical world, it cannot make the relation of the two intelligible. It seems that to accept dualism is to give up the entire scientific worldview that we have spent nearly 4 centuries to attain. So what are we to do? Note that Searle starts with the assumption that matter and the world outside of him is real, and then states that a non-material mind cannot exist since it cannot interrelate with the material world. But if we merely abandon the unverified assumption that matter and the outside world are real entities independent of the mind, then Searle's assumption fails and the following argument emerges. Since mind is, as Searle notes, seemingly non-physical, and since the external world cannot be verified to exist independently of mind-screen experience, we can infer that since non-physical mind and physical world seemingly cannot interact, then the physical world is not real, not a mind-independent realist externality, but is only a mind-screen reality. Searle's account is an example of the way it is assumed that mind can only exist via brain, which appears, however, to be incorrect given the simulation theory argument above. Searle glues onto the idea that brains must have consciousness, mind screens. In other words, instead of following a coherent and evidence-based theory that mind might be more like a non-physical item, so the evidence of the existence of the world is an assumption at best and a contradiction at worst, he locks onto a perhaps impossible thesis: mind is physical, so world is real, and meat has computers and screens inside of it, of vast, even seemingly near supernatural complexity. This is why something like the simulation theory argument, even though most logical, is not even approached by professional academics who rather start with the aforementioned assumption that supernatural televisions and computer programs spontaneously evolved in and exist within meat, even though no such televisions and computers have been discovered in any single piece of meat, such as the brain, yet. Mind-body dualism vanishes with simulation theory. Reality is neither considered to be materialist, idealist, or a combination of the two. Those are considered ideas in the mind-screen simulation, and instead reality is known to be merely one mind-screen experience on the one hand, and two desimulated experience of the creator simulator on the other. The thought of abandoning the physicalist thesis is nearly unthinkable in our current climate of academic materialism in the contemporary world. But this is strange given the well-known power of the discoveries of Kant and those after him, that our reality is our experience and we are locked inside of it, wherein all we ever know is experience, mind screen, and whether anything else exists is assumption. In other words, matter, the physical world, and the ideas of physicalism are part of experience of mind screen, and professional academics who hold to physicalism merely have to make a first non-Kantian assumption that physical reality is real and that our representations are about a reality outside of ourself that is real. And as is also well known, this is a gargantuan assumption. I merely don't make this assumption, and the simple conclusion then that one arrives at is, quite plainly, simulation theory. Another, almost even more troubling reason that the physicalist-realist assumption is plainly incorrect is the seeming fact that physical reality involves contradiction to the point that all aspects of physical reality reduce to contradiction. This was the finding of Zeno and his paradoxes. I also discussed this at great length in several publications, especially my article on mereological nihilism, Grupp 2006 publication, which went far beyond mere Zenoic discussion of the contradiction of physical reality via the measure paradox, and my 2013 talk on simulation theory at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. For over 2,500 years, the way intellectuals have dealt with these well-known contradictions in physical reality is merely to ignore them and assert that there must be an explanation which humans just don't know yet. This is a problematical and concerning move, especially in light of the fact that the aforementioned contradictions of physical reality cease to be a problem in simulation theory. Intellectuals, therefore, go even to non-logical measures to attempt to adhere to the physicality of the Mindscreen presentation and to keep their faith in the realness of externality they behold from moment to moment in their mental life, despite the many obvious and surmountable contradictions found in the simple descriptions of physical reality via realism that philosophers have been struggling with or bypassing for over 2,000 years, such as dualism, physicalism of the mind, representationalism and the homunculus problem, Zeno's paradoxes, mereological nihilism, and so on. Next section, objection to the simulation theory argument, Jack Gallant's research. Consider this passage from an article. Scientists at the University of California, Berkeley have managed to decode and reconstruct dynamic visual experiences produced by the human brain. Currently, researchers are only able to construct movie clips people have already viewed. However, the breakthrough is expected to pave the way for reproducing the movies inside our heads that no one else sees, such as dreams and memories. This is a major leap toward reconstructing internal imagery, explained Professor Jack Gallant, a UC Berkeley neuroscientist and co-author of the study published online today in the journal Current Biology. We are opening a window into the movies in our minds. According to Gallant, practical applications of this technology could eventually include a better understanding of what is happening in the minds of those who cannot communicate verbally, such as stroke victims, coma patients, and individuals with neurodegenerative diseases. It may also lay groundwork for brain-machine interface so that people with cerebral palsy and paralysis can guide computers with their minds. Our natural visual experiences, like watching a movie, said Shinji Nishimoto, lead author of the study and a postdoctoral researcher in Gallant's lab. In order for the technology to have wide applicability, we must understand how the brain processes these dynamic visual experiences. They watched 2 sets of Hollywood movie trailers while an fMRI measured blood flow through the visual cortex, the part of the brain that processes visual information. On the computer, the brain was divided into small 3-dimensional cubes known as volumetric pixels or voxels. The brain activity was recorded while subjects viewed the first set of clips, which fed into a computer program that learned second by second to associate visual patterns in the movie with the corresponding brain activity. Brain activity evoked by the second set of clips was used to test the movie reconstruction algorithm. This was done by feeding 18 million seconds of random YouTube videos into the computer program so it could predict brain activity each film clip would most likely evoke in the subject. Finally, the 100 clips that the computer program determined were most similar to the clip that the subject had probably seen merely merged to produce a blurry yet continuous reconstruction of the original movie. Reconstructing movies using brain scans has been somewhat of a challenge because the blood flow signals using fMRI much more slowly than the neural signals that encode dynamic information in movies. As such, the previous attempts to decode brain activity tend to focus on static images. We address this problem by developing a two-stage model that separately describes the underlying neural population and blood flow signals, Nishimoto added. Ultimately, Nishimoto said scientists want to understand how the brain processes dynamical visual events that are experienced in everyday life. We need to know how the brain works in naturalistic conditions. For that, we need to first understand how the brain works while we are watching movies. That is from Brain Imaging Reveals the Movies in Our Minds, September 22, 2011, by Trent Nouveau, TG Daily. The website is given in the footnote number 11. Continuing, it should be somewhat expected that PVC, or primary visual cortex, would be discovered to have patterning correlated to vision experience, since, for example, such replicating of light imprints starts in the eyes, where the imprint of what light brings through the eyes forms a picture or template of how light impacted the eyes. So to see this information transferred to the PVC should be expected. What the simulation argument above says is essentially that we can't have an ultra-advanced television made out of meat, but Gallant is essentially saying, despite how difficult it is to believe that brain meat can have televisual data inside of it, and that meat can function as televisual data, we have discovered the rudiments of this brain meat television. In other words, essentially, the simulation argument shows a paradox about experiencing the world via brain meat. And Gallant's research purports to show that, surprisingly, there is no paradox. We just had not discovered it yet. So which view is correct? The simulation argument above or Gallant's findings? If we find a clear and powerful contradiction in physical reality surrounding the concept that brains can take in light information via the eyes to form neural patterns in the PVC, then the idea that Gallant's research provides a problem for premise 3 of the simulation argument would fail, and the simulation theory argument would be a stronger thesis. It would then follow that Gallant's research is just an aspect of our computer program's simulated existence rather than a problem for the simulation theory argument. And there is such a contradiction found in physical reality. Consider this account of the discovery of a person that could think and who was even an honors student in mathematics, but who had nearly no brain. Published in the journal Science. And here's that passage. Lorber believed that his observations on a series of hydrocephalics who have severely reduced brain tissues throws into question many traditional notions about the brain. There's a young student at this university, says Lorber, who has an IQ of 126, has gained a first-class honors degree in mathematics, and is socially completely normal, and yet the boy has virtually no brain. The student's physician at the university noticed that the youth had a slightly larger than normal head, and so referred him to Lorber, simply out of interest. We did a brain scan on him, Lorber says. We saw that instead of the normal 4.5 centimeter thickness of brain tissue between the ventricles and the cortical surface, there was just a thin layer of mantle measuring a millimeter or so. His cranium is filled with cerebral spinal fluid. But startling as it may seem, this case is nothing new to the medical world. Scores of similar accounts litter the medical literature, and they go back a long way, observes Patrick Wall, professor of anatomy at University College London. How can someone with a grossly reduced cerebral mantle not only move among his fellows with no apparent social deficit, but also reach a high academic achievement? How is it that in some hydrocephalics whose brains are severely distorted asymmetrically, the expected one-sided paralysis is typically absent? It is not surprising that many hydrocephalics suffer intellectual and physical disabilities. What is surprising, however, is that a substantial portion of the patients appear to escape functional impairment in spite of grossly abnormal brain structure. That's from Is Your Brain Really Necessary? Science, 1980, volume 210, number 12, pages 1232 to 1234. There are many cases of hydrocephalics with shockingly little brain matter. My point here won't be to try to say that brain matter is not being used, but my point will be rather to suggest that we do not have evidence that there is a PVC at work in situations like with Lorber's honors student in mathematics. In other words, if there are cases where honors students in mathematics have nearly zero or perhaps zero brain matter, to have visual experience of the world with no evidence of a primary visual cortex at work in this representing process, and evidence that a primary visual cortex does not even exist in this particular person, then we arrive at the following reductio ad absurdum argument to the idea that our reality involves humans who have brains that create televisual picture screen experience. And the argument is as follows. Point 1, Gallant's research of brain meat having televisual picture screen representations in the neural activity provides a contradiction to premise 3 of the simulation theory argument, wherein the simulation theory argument would possibly fail. Point 2, Lorber and others have shown that some hydrocephalics function normally or even above normally without having primary visual cortex brain matter, as far as anyone can tell, or much of any brain matter at all. Point 3, 2 contradicts 1 and 1 fails. In other words, the first premise and the second premise contradict, and the idea that Gallant's findings pose a contradiction to simulation theory fails. Gallant's research would only apply to cases where televisually experiencing creatures have observable primary visual cortex activity. If there are televisually experiencing humans who do not have evidence of having a primary visual cortex or utilizing a PVC to copy imprints into the PVC from the eyes, then Gallant's research would not overturn premise 3 of the simulation theory argument. Gallant's work is just part of the story of the cinema of human simulated reality. Furthermore, this objection that comes from Gallant's work is not as powerful as it first appears, for several reasons. One such would be that it is not an objection about consciousness, since Gallant's work is, rather, merely about light interacting with the body. First the retina and then later the PVC. If light patterns are imprinted in the retina, to discover that they are imprinted in an area of the brain is not only not surprising but quite expected. But to go to the next step and to describe how these light imprints in the meat of the human brain lead to self-aware digital picture screen experiencing flushed with feelings, higher order capacities to do higher order mathematics, and so forth, is quite a departure from mere light imprinting in the retina and then being copied into the brain. Next section, the thought implantation arguments. From the simulation theory argument, we can arrive at further powerful inferences about simulation theory. Firstly, I will present an argument which shows that conscious Mindscreen content can only be implanted by another mind, not perceived and processed in a representationalist scenario. Consider the following reductio ad absurdum. Point 1, not R. Point 2, since any ME in MP is not caused by externality via R, then any ME is caused by another mental entity ME star. 3, but ME star would require ME double star, and so on ad infinitum. If any ME is created by another ME star, a vicious regress ensues. Conclusion, any ME cannot be created by any other non-identical MEN star. Here is the argument writing out the terms fully. Point 1, conclusion of the simulation theory argument. Consciousness is a simulation, not an apprehension of externality. 2. Any mental content or mental entity does not come from any external reality, such as an external physical reality. So perhaps the mentation is caused by other mentation. One mental entity in one's mind of any sort can be the cause of the reason for any other mental entity that it appears to be possibly linked to in one's mind. If one mental entity causes another, then another mental entity must cause the first, and another one causing the initial one, and so on to infinity. Point 4, there is never a first step in the chain of mental entities causing one another, wherein there can't be any regress in the first place. Conclusion, no mental entity of any sort can cause any other mental entity to exist. This is a quite straightforward vicious regress, which is somewhat similar to the well-known homunculus regress. We know realism, R, cannot account for Mindscreen content, and the above argument also shows us that thoughts can't generate each other to account for their existence. Any chunk of Mindscreen content cannot create any other chunk of Mindscreen content. So, what is left? If mental content is not caused by an externality, and if mental content is not generating and or causing itself, then it would appear that mental content and mental entities must be implanted into the mind screen. Now consider this argument, which uses the conclusion of the last argument. Point 1, conclusion of previous argument, not ME causing ME star for any ME or ME star. 2, any ME cannot create itself, lest that ME not have sufficient reason, unless the ME is free-willed, supernatural occurrence. Point 3, not R. 4, conclusion, mind screen consists of processes where MEs are implanted into mind prime by something from not mind prime and not R. If mental entities cannot come from within the mind screen or be caused by copying or representing an externality that the mind screen believes it is interacting with, then it seems that the conclusion we are left with is that another intelligence is composing the mind screen content and placing it in mind screens. Premise 2 is important in that it points out that there are two types of mental entities, implanted and free-willed. For those who do not believe in free will, there would only be one sort of mental entity, which is an implanted mental entity. Many are troubled by free-willed events, since ultimately, to be truly free and having no external cause, these are self-caused events and possibly supernatural. It is most likely that merely the impetus, the choice, regardless of whatever choice the word could possibly mean, mechanically speaking, is all that the mind screen does in the free will situation. And where after choice is made, in the rare occurrences that such free willed events happen, the implanter simulator creator implants the consequent mind screen content. In a Christian perspective, this is not problematical and is expected, since the human mind screen is in God's image, where God is a creator of things ex nihilo, and thus a human can be expected to be such as well, such as in being creator of free-willed events ex nihilo and supernaturally. Regardless, if there are some self-caused, possibly supernatural mental entities, they would be free-willed and seemingly not implanted mental entities, at least at their impetus, wherein not all of consciousness would be a computer simulation caused by external forces, since there would be a smattering of self-caused, free-willed mind screen events. The word implanted here means that mental content is being placed into the mind screen experiencing of mind prime, not by mapping its external environment via sensing with sense organs, nor by one thought leading to another, so to speak. Rather, a different means of mental entities being placed into mind prime exists. If mental entities are not caused by an externality, nor by a mind causing its own content, the remaining option for how mental entities could reside in mind prime would appear to be that mental entities are placed into mind prime by another intelligence, such as the creator simulator. When one introspects to see the chaotic nature of mind and how thoughts and feelings viewed through introspection come and go, where self is not cause or deliberator of these mental entities coming and going quickly in consciousness, it therein appears roughly as if thoughts and mental entities are being implanted, and certainly do not appear as if one is choosing which mental entities appear in mind. And introspection shows the mind screen to take on the appearance of an entity out of the control of the simulant. This is a widely discussed mystery, though not a mystery for simulation theorists, such as with David Hume's well-known analysis of mind that led him to question the nature and the existence of the self. Next section. The mental entity implanter, creator simulator, is an intelligence and is God. A reason for believing the aforementioned implantation scenario is due to the mind screen content appearing to derive from another intelligence. Consider the following argument. Point 1, conclusion of previous argument, which is mind screen consists of processes where mental entities are implanted into mind prime by something that is not mind prime and not a realist scenario. Point 2, collections of mental entities that compose a mind screen and mind prime are not generated by copying, representing the organized patterns from the content of a supposed externality. 3, if mind screen content is not a facsimile, then it must be constructed, built, fabricated, more analogous to an artist creating a landscape than a copy machine creating a landscape. Point 4, collections of mental entities that compose a mind screen and mind prime have organization, arrangement, which can only be positioned, strategically implanted, by an entity that can plan the construction of the mind screen mental entities. Point 5, conclusion, the implanter of the mental entities in mind prime exhibits intelligence. The implanter, creator, simulator contains qualities possibly parallel to a computer programmer. The arguments given in this section appear to prove there is an implanter of mental entities, and that would be a disproof of solipsism. That may not be a concern to many readers of this article, but a simple and powerful disproof of solipsism has not existed hitherto, and is something philosophers have been concerned with for some time. Further, just by directly knowing that mind prime exists, which is irrefutable information, we can use that information to prove that a creator simulator exists. That is roughly identical to saying that just by knowing mind prime exists, one can know that God exists. Next section, reality involves other mind screen simulants not identical to mind prime. And since we know with logical certainty that a being describable as a creator God has created mind prime, one's mind screen, and continues to create it at all moments, probabilistically speaking, it is enormously probable that other simulants exist, and we are interacting with them via the simulation. Desimulation experience confirms directly that the creator simulator is a being of goodness, love, and ecstasy. Footnote. That point will be argued for in an upcoming paper I have nearly completed, which is available for anybody to verify. For that reason, the creator simulator created you for a positive, loving, and ecstatic reason, such as to have intimacy with you. This is the message of the theology of Christianity. Therefore, is it more likely that a creator simulator created only you to interact with, or also other and possibly infinitely many other simulants for the creator simulator's purposes. The creator simulator would be a being that is difficult for mind prime to understand, but it would appear difficult to hold the conclusion that mind prime is the only mind screen that the creator simulator created. If that reasoning is correct, then there are more than one mind screens in the simulation that we exist within. Furthermore, since it can be verified in desimulation experience, such as monastic prayer or hesychasm prayer, to just give two examples, that the creator simulator is a being, a spirit of love, goodness, and pure joy, we can know the motives of the creator simulator. For example, love is something between beings, not for a single being. A single being loving would only love itself, which is narcissism, a type of misery. Love is shared across beings, so the nature of the creator simulator is to love and be loved. It is therefore enormously probable that the creator simulator created simulates to find love with one another in order to generate yet more love, which the creator simulator would be interested in. For these reasons, it would appear to be inductively conclusive that other beings we are interacting with in our simulated mind screen experience are the bodysuits, the simulation guises of other mind screen activity in the simulation, and they are not mindless apparitions or beings with no mental content, with only the appearance of having mental content. In simpler terms, human simulants may be actually interacting via shared simulation experience, where picture screen feeling infused realities of mind screen simulants mix to some degree. Next section, mind screen simulation theory as a Christian theology. The above metaphysics contains many unanswered questions. For example, why would the creator simulator implant realities into mind screens that contain so much pain, sadness, and evil? Call that unanswered question, quote, the problem of evil, unquote. A question like that is best handled in two steps. One, considering the above simulation theory as a Christian theology, since the problem of evil exists in Christian theology in an analogous way as it does in the above simulation theory, and since Christianity appears to be a simulation theory, as will be shown below. Two, in Christian theology, the problem of evil can be explained as being an inevitable aspect of reality, and the only logical reality an infinite creator could design by including the hitherto unknown scriptural datum of what is called God's pre-election knowledge of the soul, which will not be discussed in this paper and which has already been discussed elsewhere. See Grupp 2018a, 2018b. For reasons stated in 2, I will only discuss how simulation theory is a Christian theology, and I will only give an initial skeleton draft of Christian simulation theology. Consider the following points which seem to lead to a Christian simulation theology. 1. God is a spirit, John 4:24. Humans are in God's image, Genesis 1:26. And therefore humans are also a spirit. For that reason, humans are not describable by the paradox of the physicalist mind screen brain meat, held ubiquitously by professional academics, but rather as ineffable supernatural feeling-infused mind screens, which is precisely what human simulants can be verified to be via the evidence of introspection as discussed above in the discussion about the start of John Searle's 1977 book, Mystery of Consciousness. 2. The Bible says God is everywhere. God fills all things. Numbers 14:21. All things are in God. Colossians 1:16 and 17, NRSV. Mind screens are in Christ, and Christ is in human mind screen simulants. And the kingdom of God is within simulants. Luke 17:21. Consider John 15:5. I am the vine, ye are the branches. He that abideth in me, and I in him, shall bringeth forth much fruit, for without me ye can do nothing. KJV. Point 3. The physical reality is a problem or an enemy to the simulant. See James 4:4 and 1 John 2:15. And being in God's presence, see Psalm 16:11 among many other verses. And in heaven, Philippians 3:20. Now, Psalm 13:5 in the NIV, Galatians 2:20, is dissimulation joy. The picture we have from Christian theology is that all is in spirit, and spirit is in all. All exists within the Christian God, who's non-physical, and thus all is non-physical, as is expected with the Mindscreen metaphysics, but not with the realist representationalist philosophy. The conclusion of the Mindscreen argument involves the idea that no externality can cause Mindscreen content. This may seem to suggest that a creator-simulator, creator God, cannot be the implanter. But note that in Christian metaphysics, such as found in John 15:5, God is described as in the Mindscreen, and the Mindscreen in God. Therefore, God is not an externality of the Mindscreen simulant. The picture we have is one of an implanter that the Mindscreen exists amid, and which exists in the Mindscreen, where both are spirit, which is a better description of the supernatural computing minds needed for the ultra-advanced simulation apparatuses, such as Mindscreens. The Bible never mentions that externality is real, and on the other hand, it regularly mentions that God is in the simulant, and the simulant in God. If the simulant exists in God, the simulant does not exist in a physical externality, but rather exists in God, and thus in supernatural spirit, which is precisely what simulation theory requires, and which is precisely what representationalist metaphysics cannot involve. God would not be an externality to the Mindscreen, nor would God use mental entities to generate the Mindscreen, but rather God is a creator. So when we say that God is the implanter of Mindscreen content, we also mean that God is the creator of the Mindscreen, the simulant from moment to moment. The Christian God is an infinite being, Psalm 147:5 KJV. And since God is spirit, the simulation is, in Christian terms, entirely supernatural and best describable in terms of infinities and joy.